Welcome to Mulready Minutes with Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner Glenn Mulready. This is a podcast about insurance for insurance folks, risk managers, and business leaders. We'll dive deep and look at what is and isn't working, talk to leaders in the industry, and keep you informed on what's happening in Oklahoma and around the country.
Hi, this is Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner Glenn Mulready. We have a special guest today on our Mulready Minutes podcast. We always have special guests, but a special friend here today with us to dive deep into a topic that is difficult and prevalent out in our society and has implications in the insurance world, though not very specific to insurance, but more healthcare related. And so let me read the bio here. Our guest is mental health reform advocate Cathy Costello. Cathy, originally from Overland Park, Kansas, pursued her passion for classical music and opera, earning her Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Kansas, where she met her husband, Mark Costello. And I can tell you, the lady can sing. I've heard her.
Thank you, sir.
They settled in Edmond, Oklahoma, raising 5 children while working in education and building small businesses together. Mark's political career as the Oklahoma State Labor Commissioner was supported by Cathy until his tragic death in 2015, when their oldest son, battling schizoaffective disorder, fatally stabbed Mark. Since then, Cathy has become a vocal advocate for mental health reform, testifying before Senate committees and championing legislation like the Labor Commissioner Mark Costello Act. She travels nationwide sharing her story and serves on numerous mental health advocacy boards, aiming to prevent similar tragedies and support the millions affected by mental illness in America. Cathy, welcome to our video podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Glenn. It's a delight to be here. I know you're an old friend, a friend to Mark and a friend to me, and I'm delighted that we are still talking about a very important subject that touches just about every Oklahoma family in one way or another.
Yeah, and you have been a strong vocal and emotional support and advocate out there. What's up? 8 coming up on 9 years, I guess.
Yeah, it'll be
space.
9 years in August. Mark was taken from us on August 23rd of 2015. We had a pretty perfect life for many years. Built businesses, international and global businesses, and in his absence, my oldest daughter and I are leading one of those today. So working full time with that. Built a beautiful home. Mark loved serving as a statesman, as the state Oklahoma Labor Commissioner, was preparing to seek higher office, and everything was great. But during the years of his service and even earlier on, we began to notice some things in our second oldest child, who is our first son, Christian. He was a great boy, very kind, very loving, appreciative, never left the dinner table without saying thank you for a meal, kissed us goodnight. But he was different. He was slow in his cognitive development and slow to read, slow in his writing, holding a fork, things like this. But, Mark and I loved our children where they were. And if you have more than one kiddo, we know that everyone is different. Uh-huh. They all have strengths and weaknesses. Christian was very artistic. He was great at filmmaking. So we supported that. And we thought his interest in filmmaking and script writing was part of his, we would say, his eccentricity. So we didn't think of it as mental illness. And you have to remember,
He's creative.
Yeah. And like so many other families who maybe have never seen or dealt with mental illness, you don't always know what it looks like. The saying hindsight is 20/20. I can look back now on a lot of things, a lot of small behaviors that were an indicator, but we didn't realize it because he was a great son. As far as the son is concerned, he was the best. So we didn't have any violent behavior, angry behavior. He wasn't disobedient. He was just odd. Talked to himself a lot, would wander off, be in his own world, repeating sentences to himself, which he covered by saying, well, I'm just thinking out scripts in my head. So as we began serving the state, and Mark is labor commissioner in the family, as you know, it's a family affair when you serve the state and your family participates.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not. And it's great when they're all on board. But as Mark was running and serving, Christian's mental health issues began to escalate and increase and became very worrisome. Finally, one day, we asked Christian if he would be willing to go see a doctor, and he said he would. We, after several meetings with the doctor, and he was very open to having us part of his diagnosis and his treatment plan in the beginning. And he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder with psychosis. And we were like, well,
now,
what?
Let me interrupt you.
Yes,
so,
sir.
So he's an adult at that point.
He is an
He's over
adult. He was
18.
19 when he
Yeah.
was diagnosed.
Okay.
And that is another issue for families who have, and this is the hardest part, is when you have adult loved ones with a mental illness, whether it's a child, an adult child, a parent, a sibling. I work with a young lady who is fighting for her sister who lives on the streets of Oklahoma City, a young lady by the name of Sarah Smith. We have worked the last 2 years on a guardianship bill. We were able to expand language on that, which will be helpful to judges trying to figure out if someone needs immediate help. That's another story, but it's part of the story. So Christian was diagnosed with this, and I said, what's schizoaffective disorder? And the doctor said, well, it's a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. I heard that word schizophrenia. I was shocked. I was thinking of the person screaming on the corner in the Law and Order episode in New York City. I said, what is psychosis? And he said, well, Christian is having breaks from reality. But Mark Costello, as you knew him, he was a real positive, can-do kind of guy. And Mark was like, okay, well, we're going to tackle this. We're going to find the best doctors. We're going to find the best medication, the best treatments, the best treatment outcome that we could find. And he was just positive. He was a solution finder. But mental illness is a very hard monster to conquer. And I think Mark's flaw was that he thought if Christian just knew how much he loved him, he could save him. Mm-hmm. And love just isn't enough when you have a brain disorder. So mental illness truly is a chemical imbalance in the brain, and we describe it as a behavioral health issue. I don't like that term because it's not, because, I didn't have a pony as a child, so I'm acting out. But the way the mental illness in the brain presents is in a behavioral manner. But that's diabetes. You can go into a diabetic coma if you've ever been around someone and their behavior changes. It's not because they're having a behavioral issue. It's because they're having a chemical imbalance in their body and in their brain.
Sounds like Mark had a parental response to that versus a medical response to
Absolutely. In fact, this may come as a shock, but we didn't always agree on how to handle the situation with him or any of our kids. I would not say we argued, but I would say we disagreed. And Christian, as he began to escalate in his mental illness, the paranoia came, the mania, lack of sleep, delusions. And one of the delusions and the paranoia he had was that his father worked for the government. So the government is bad. And this is very common with people with mental illness. He would say to me, Dad's spying on my phone. He's reading my emails. He has bugs in my apartment. He's put a bomb under my car. And I would argue and argue and argue with him about this. And you could not convince him otherwise. So I began to be worried about some of the things Christian was saying about Mark. And I said, Mark, you go and meet Christian every other week. And he would give him some cash. One of the things I disagreed with him on. He said, well, there's a reason I give Christian cash, Cathy, because he would show up. They picked a neutral place, Brahms on May in Oklahoma City, and I know he'll come. And then I can look in his eyes and see, are you hungry? Do you need to see your therapist? Do you need medication? Do you need clothing?
Are you taking your medication?
And I said, just send him a check then. And he said, that's not being a father. That's the kind of man he was.
Yeah.
So behind the scenes, that's what he was doing, trying to be the best father to this ill, as any parent would do with your child who had any kind of an illness.
Yeah, and I hope you don't mind me saying, but you guys had the resources
to
seek out the absolute best in care and options and paths for that treatment as
so
well.
I had shared with you earlier, and people are kind of shocked that even with good insurance, we had great insurance through the state. At one point, we had great personal insurance. And we spent $150,000 out of our own pocket. Now, there are state places like the Crisis Center. If you have a loved one that's in a crisis and they can go for a day, a few days, a week, even a few weeks, that is supported by our tax dollars. But oftentimes that's just not enough. So my worry and my concern is if the Costellos, who had successful businesses and we were able to financially pay for the best doctors, the best medications, the best treatment centers, some out of state, some in Louisiana. We were at Menninger's for 2.5 weeks, and the charge was $30,000. And we filed it with our insurance. And guess how much our insurance covered for that 2.5 week stay in-house? $3,000. So we swiped that card and maxed it out, $27,000. So what does the average family, who's middle class income, or a loved one who does not have insurance, what do they do? And it's I hear from families weekly, and it's an issue. And I know that you are our insurance commissioner, and it had been brought to my attention a few years ago that if a family wants to have their loved one in a facility or see a doctor or try to afford some medication, Invega is a great medication for schizophrenia. It comes in shot form, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day. Now they're coming out with a 6-month shot, but it's like $3,000. Insurance, at least a few years ago, would cover up to all except $900, but $900 a month is still a lot for a medication. So my understanding is that you can come to the insurance department and say, hey, can you look at my policy? Is there something? Because sometimes the providers don't always understand what's available.
Sure.
So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
That's our role, and we do have resources. But let me get back to that, because this is a good segue to talk about other barriers to mental health care.
Yes.
One I think that you just expounded on was the financial side of
Yes.
that. But what other barriers are there that prevent people, or maybe a perception that prevent people from seeking mental health
Well, stigma.
care?
And I'm going to be very transparent with you and let you know that when Christian had his diagnosis, I did not tell my parents for 2 years because of the stigma. I was afraid of what they were going to think. And you find out that people do have a stigma, and mental illness does not discriminate. It doesn't care how much money you have, how little money you have, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, what your religion is. And what I found out after the loss of Mark, I talked to many people, some high up in government, some high up in some of the greatest people that have built the state of Oklahoma, sharing their very similar stories with me. So the idea
within their own families.
And what I've found out is that just about every family, and not every family, but is touched by mental illness and addiction, and there's a correlation there, one way or another. And it might be your parent, or it might be your daughter, or it might be your cousin. When Mark was lying in state at the Capitol, we were up there for several hours. Governor Mary Fallon invited us to bring his body there, and we had a lot of great people stop. And here was my wake-up call. People would lean over, give me a hug, and whisper in my ear, my mother had schizophrenia. My son committed suicide. My sister has bipolar disorder. About every second or third person, I heard it for hours, because I think they felt like they saw me standing up there courageously with my kids, thanking people for honoring Mark. They knew who he was, and they felt like, I can tell somebody. So stigma is a huge issue. Okay, so let's say we lift the stigma. Well, you have to have places for treatment. So the next thing we hear is we don't have enough beds. And I speak with the legislature frequently. We have a mental health caucus, a mix of Democrats and Republicans, and I've worked with both. And it's wonderful to see people come together on this issue and not be partisan, thank God. And a lot of times it's because they know someone in their own life that has suffered. So we need beds. Great. You can build beds all day long. But if you don't have staff, so I would like to see Oklahoma promote psychiatric nursing programs. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I've heard that one of the universities has pulled that program. I think it's OU, but we may not want to air that in case I'm speaking out of turn. But I've heard that's a disappointment, and we don't pay people very well in this. We're way below the average salary for psychiatrists. So we don't have enough beds. We have one place in the state of Oklahoma. Are we at 4.2 million people now? Okay, that's what I just heard that from recently. I heard Congresswoman Stephanie Bice. I thought it was still at 3.9 or 4, so we're keep increasing. But we have one facility for people who have severe mental illness who have committed crimes. They used to call it the criminally insane, and that's the Forensic Center in Veneta, Oklahoma, with like 300 beds. I mean, do the math. That's not enough. So we've got to have facilities available and good treatment and lift the stigma. And it's about education. So my hope is to try to educate legislators, because that's a lot of times for state facilities, that's where the money comes from. It has to be allotted. Mental health gets the short end of the stick frequently.
Yeah. Well, so I guess what we've heard is financial resources to seek out care and insurance part of that.
Yes.
The stigma, and then access or provider access, just not having enough providers out there. So those are some of the barriers.
Yes.
On the insurance piece, mental health parity has been out there and passed for a while. I know I've got a team working on what we call it the MAPIA at the national level,
Wonderful.
Just ensuring that. And so, but any comments on the mental health parity, and have you seen any change there with that? Or
well, I will tell you something I've become very involved with, where I do think that there's some parity, and I think it's really important, and that is my involvement with crisis intervention training, CIT officers. So if a family has a loved one in a crisis, and perhaps there's a criteria to calling a CIT officer. You can't just call them because you think, oh, my son's acting crazy. They have to be what they call suicidal or homicidal. In other words, they are a harm to themselves or could be a harm to others. And you're seeing this behavior escalate. So you can't pick up the phone for just any old reason. But what I have found in the state of Oklahoma, especially in the past 5 years or so, is a huge increase in police departments and police academies getting their police officers trained. It's a voluntary program. That's the thing that's so incredible. It's a 40-hour program. And when I started teaching crisis intervention training 5 or 6 years ago, I might have 8 officers and first responders. Now they're 25, 35, 40, 50. And practically weekly or every other week around the state. And just recently, they've added it as part of their criteria for the police academy in Oklahoma City. And I believe, if I'm understanding this correctly, I'm the first lay person they allowed into that training when I shared at even a more extensive presentation on mental health. And when you talk to these police officers, I ask them, how many times in the first week on the job, do you see somebody in a mental health crisis in the first week on the job? And I have about a fourth of the class. How about the first month? Half of the class. How about the first year? Everyone raises their hand. So they are encountering people in a psychotic episode. So this kind of parity and getting the word out there, I think I'm using that word correctly, hopefully, is that it opens up the conversation. And they understand that this is a real issue, and they partner with families, and hopefully, and with their conversation with facilities that provide mental health treatment, it's coming, it's bubbling up, it's coming to the forefront. We're speaking about it, we're more open about it. And someone said to me, do you think we have more mental illness than ever? A lot of times it's blamed on COVID. And I said, I don't think we are. I think we are now more aware. And we are speaking up, and we are more open.
Yeah. To the removal of the stigma. I mean, maybe we're making progress there to that point.
Yeah,
right?
I think we're making baby steps, but baby steps are better than no steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a passion that I never imagined would be part of my life, my mission.
Yeah.
But, we never know what direction God is going to point us in.
Certainly wasn't in your prayers at night that would come upon you, right? Yeah. Well, thank you for embracing that and taking on that mantle. But I had read an article recently about your work with first responders, and you just talked about the CIT.
Oh, yes.
So is that really what that involves, is CIT? Are you doing more with first responders around the state, or what else does that look like?
The crisis intervention training is tremendous. I am not afraid to go to the legislators and talk about legislation. I mentioned the Courtney Smith Act, which was an expansion on language in a guardianship bill. When a family decides they need to have guardianship over their mentally ill loved one, the language in Oklahoma in that bill really was nothing more than a glorified power of attorney. So I worked with this young lady, introduced her to some legislators, got to speak with our Senate pro tem, introduced her to the governor, and the governor's family has been very open about Sarah's family, and she and I have had many deep, long, private discussions about this issue. So, that is a tremendous thing. The AOT bill. I did travel.
Where is that guardianship bill now? Is that something that's
it passed?
Okay.
It passed on the last day of session last year.
Okay.
We were down there pink slipping people right and left, and we got a unanimous vote on the House and the Senate. So it's the second bill in Oklahoma that I've had a unanimous mental health vote, and the second time I've received a standing ovation for it. So it's just, it's amazing. And I am finding a lot of people don't understand it, but at least they're willing to start listening. And so and it's, knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. So it's about education. I did go to DC and assisted with the Helping Families in Mental Health Crisis Act. That was a joint bill between congressman from Pennsylvania, a Republican congressman, and a Democrat female congressman from Texas, and they came together. Again, a great opportunity for both sides of the aisle to work together towards an issue that does not discriminate about your politics. So,
yeah, good. Well, what I might talk about for a minute here, Cathy, if I can, is what you'd asked earlier, the insurance department and
yes,
services that we
absolutely.
provide. So just to make sure folks know, we have a consumer assistance area. We have folks answering the phones and emails all day, every day. Oftentimes those are complaints about a claim or something they're not happy with. But other times it's just understanding and explanation of their. We have a life and health division, and they know the contracts, they know the company requirements, they know the laws and the rules around those. And so if someone has questions about their mental health coverage or how that might play out in their health insurance, great resource there for them. And then the other area that we have is on the compliance side, where we are, to your point of access and providers, and there are requirements on companies to have what we call network adequacy. And so that's another area that we're monitoring and discovering. We had Zach from Healthy Minds, Healthy Minds
wonderful.
Here on the show not too long ago.
Wonderful.
And we talked about some of the problems with provider access and accuracy even of network information. And, they did a full survey and discovered a number of things that just weren't accurate. A phone number went to a dead number, or, provider
right.
didn't know they were part of a network, or that kind of thing. So we're working hard to try to help with that access as well. So those are really the two big areas at the insurance department.
I really appreciate that you are doing that. I have a 92-year-old mother. I have other family members that have health issues outside of mental health. And it seems like the whole health system has gotten very muddied. Some of the, even in just my mom trying to get a hold of a cardiologist or a vascular doctor, has had some of those same issues: the wrong number, the wrong information, scheduled on the wrong day. So it is so important what you're doing, and it's stressful for families and patients not to have that clarity. So what you're doing is they're already in a stressful situation. What you're doing helps lift that stress. So I appreciate that. And I will certainly continue to promote. Call Glenn. He's the man.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, anything else that you'd like folks to know? Or
I just, I believe that life is a gift and time is a gift. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend to everybody to use your gifts wisely. If you've got breath in your body, you're here for a purpose.
You're here.
Sometimes it's not the purpose that you had envisioned. But seek what that purpose is, because I believe we're here on this earth to help each other, and that's what I'm trying to do. That's what you're trying to do, is to help our Oklahoma neighbors be happier, healthier, and get help. And so I would just tell people, reach out and find out what your mission is, because we all have something to contribute.
Yeah, that's a great word. And Cathy, I'll close with, there's a handful of times in my life where there are events, world events, that you remember exactly where you were. And Mark's death was one of those. I was sitting on the couch with my wife. Mm-hmm. I got a news flash on my phone, and my wife saw me look at my phone, and I, out loud said, "Oh, dear Lord." And she could tell something horrible. And, Glenn, what? And it was the news about Mark's death. So on that note, though, thank you for taking that event and taking that mantle on for the betterment of all of us, not just in Oklahoma, but nationwide. So,
well, thank you. I think Mark would be proud of the work that my family is doing, and I think he would be proud of you and the work that you are doing. So,
yeah,
thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Cathy.
You're so welcome.
That wraps up our show with mental health reform advocate Cathy Costello. Thank you for joining us. We will catch you next time on the next Mulready Minutes podcast.
If you found this episode informative, please subscribe and share with your colleagues. Visit oid.ok.gov/podcast. Let us know what topics you would like to hear about on this podcast. Until next time, take care from the Oklahoma Insurance Department.